podcast on PowerTalk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeart Radio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is award-nominated editor Anne McCabe, who was on my show last year. Welcome back, Anne.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Today we're going to be talking about A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks. So last year we talked about Can You Ever Forgive Me, the Melissa McCarthy, Richard E. Grant movie, which was nominated for quite a few wonderful awards last year. I'm hearing great things about this movie already, and the Oscar buzz out there, particularly for Tom Hanks' performance in this particular film. This is the second time you've worked with Mariel Heller. What was it like working with her for a second time? Does it develop a shorthand after you've worked together once?
Oh, for sure. I was thrilled to be asked to work on her third movie. And, when you go back and work with somebody again, there's a trust. You've developed a shorthand. You understand each other. The communication is much easier. And certainly it was very good on Can You Ever Forgive Me as well. But, while she was shooting, we would be sending texts and emails and have conversations about the footage that was coming in. So it's always great when you already know somebody and you can feel comfortable talking to them about what you're seeing.
Exactly. I would imagine that does make it a whole lot easier. What kind of preparation did you have to do prior to beginning editing this movie?
Well, I think, everybody working on this movie felt like they needed to be respectful of the original show. So, a lot of the key people, including, of course, Tom Hanks, we all watched a lot of the episodes. We did a ton of research watching the original show, and we felt like we needed to honor, the real Fred Rogers in terms of his pacing and his timing and his message. This couldn't be a super slick version of Mr. Rogers, because the original show had a calm pacing and a homemade quality to it in a way. It was not high tech.
No, and I understand that you had production designer Jade Healy was able to go and into Mrs. Rogers' home. She invited her to her home and allowed her to use some of the real photos, family photos, and some other things. So you had some of the people who worked on Mr. Rogers' show. You filmed it at the same studio, correct, in Pittsburgh?
Yes, they shot it in Pittsburgh, and a lot of the people involved with the original show were, some of them were actually, on set, and I think one of the cameramen is an extra when they were actually shooting the portions of the show on the set. And Mrs. Joanne Rogers, who's a character in the movie, right, but the real Joanne Rogers was very much part of the whole research for the show and the original writers. Everybody felt like it was extremely important to have those people involved in the making of this movie. It's not like we're going to go off and try a whole new approach. We wanted their blessing, and we wanted them to feel positive about the movie. One other aspect about the show is, like the original show, the way that it was shot and the way that it was edited had a certain style, and they actually used the same type of camera to shoot the portions of the movie that are about the show that they used on the actual show. And then certain things, the way that the show is edited, is careful to replicate the same kind of style, not super slick cuts, and like the dissolves. We measured the dissolves to make sure that they were similar in the style. And there's like a section of the show where, it goes to picture. I don't know if you ever watched the show, but they would have a little sequence where they'd say, here's a trip to a bakery, or, this is a little story about how crayons are made. And in the movie, there's a section where they show, this is how magazines are made. And we imitated the style in which, those little segments were put together.
I did feel as if there was a reverence, obviously, for Mr. Rogers, and that Muriel Heller, in choosing Tom Hanks, who could be Mr. Rogers better than Tom Hanks? I mean, seriously.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
I mean,
the nicest guy in the world.
Truthfully, I've never met him in person, but that's what you get. That's what you feel.
I met him in person. We had an Academy screening back in New York, and he could not have been nicer. And he came up to me and said, "Thank you so much." I mean, it was an incredible honor to be able to cut his performance, and it's really moving. It's a movie about patience, acceptance, understanding, forgiveness, and his performance and Matthew Rhys's, the combination of the two. It's a really moving movie, and it's not always the style of movie that I usually work on. I do a lot of different things, but I do comedies and used to kind of like quick cuts to make things, tense. And this is a movie that sort of takes its time and builds a really raw emotional performance and story. And I've watched this movie hundreds of times, and I still get choked up at different scenes in the movie.
Just what we need right now, don't we? I mean, I think Hollywood is, the movies that are coming out right now, I feel like Hollywood is producing movies that are kind of the juxtaposition to everything that's going on in our world right now,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I feel like the movies that are coming out are hopeful and give us characters that we can believe in, like Harriet, Harriet Tubman. I mean, it's such a wonderfully done movie and inspiring, rather than the downtrodden. I'm glad that they didn't really focus a lot on the slavery part of it and more on who she was. And so this movie, certainly after the documentary, the documentary, which it's right now I'm losing the name of that. Anyhow,
won't you be my neighbor?
Yeah, won't you be my neighbor? Thank you.
Yeah.
And that was just beautiful to watch that and inspiring. And so when I read that they were going to actually make a movie out of it, I was even more excited about that. Unfortunately, Mr. Rogers was not during my time period, so in my lifetime. So I didn't really. I mean, I'm very aware of him and what he did, and I've seen things about him, but an incredibly inspiring man in real life as well as on television. And I think that's what comes through in the film, because he was who he was. There wasn't an on-screen personality and then a different personality, and we've heard that before. I mean, you hear that quite often, that a lot of people that we see on television or our homes that we have a certain impression of being one way, we've only to be disappointed to find out that they were completely different when the camera wasn't running. And that was not true for Mr. Rogers.
Oh, for sure. I mean, a real positive role model, and positive, male role model. I was thrilled to bring my son, who's 17, to the premiere. The movie talks a lot about, redefining masculinity and how it's okay to be, talk about your feelings, or, the characters in the movie are good men. They are good men, but they have challenges, and how difficult it is to kind of acknowledge emotion. So I was thrilled to take him to the movie, and he really enjoyed it. But certainly Fred Rogers was an incredible person. And like in the movie, he's not a saint. He's not a perfect person. He's a really, really good man. But he also, has his own things he struggles with. Not like you're going to find out all kinds of crazy dirt about him, but just like any other human being, he can have a hard time as well. And I think that that's quite moving to see.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as I say to everyone, we all have our crosses to bear. I think everybody who comes on this journey of life, we all came down to learn some lessons, if you believe in heaven or whatever, wherever we came from. But we're here on this journey to learn things. And it's different for everybody, and it's how we deal with those crosses that we do have to bear. Yeah.
For sure. And the movie has it deals with difficult topics of childhood trauma, And, that's not always easy to talk about. But I think it does an incredible job of, learning about acceptance and ways to deal with issues that you might have had.
That's beautiful, and it's beautiful, and the relationship between Matthew Rhys, whom I adore, and Mr. Rogers. Talk a little bit about that and how that changed Matthew's character.
For sure. I mean, well, first of all, those scenes were the most fun to edit because the scenes between Matthew Rhys, Lloyd, and Fred Rogers, Tom Hanks, were like, there's sort of a dance where Lloyd, he's a journalist and he's trying to get dirt on Mr. Rogers, and he has a sort of preconception about this hokey children's television host, and he doesn't really want to do this assignment. And so he's trying to there's a tension where he's trying to get information out of Mr. Rogers, and he's going to be the one who's going to find out where his vulnerabilities are. And then there's the reverse of Fred, who really wants to talk to Lloyd because he recognizes that he's somebody who's struggling. And there's incredible scenes between the two of them where there's back and forth, and one is trying to get something from the other. And then there's a turn where, Fred really starts to get under Lloyd's skin, and Lloyd realizes that Fred is somebody more complicated than just a simple TV personality. And then eventually the reverse happens too, where Lloyd also manages to get Tom to talk about things that are difficult. And those scenes were really fun. There's also like a lot of humor in the scenes because, the frustration that Lloyd feels when he's trying to get things out of Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers keeps bringing up these puppets and putting them in his face. and it's really enjoyable. And I would say that in the edit, there was a lot of fantastic material, but it became clear that the scenes between the two men were just like fantastic. And we really wanted to showcase those.
They're absolutely wonderful. I agree. It's got to be interesting. What did you cut out of the film that you hated to cut out of the film? What ended up on the floor that you were going, no, and you cried or something?
Well, it's so difficult because there's so much wonderful material, and Jody Lee Lipes was the, director of photography. He had these incredibly beautiful scenes, and of course Marielle, she's a wonderful director, and there was just so much beautiful material in the movie. There's a lot of transitions that are, we used a different type of transition in the movie, which were these miniatures, because like in the actual show, they had these little miniatures of the town where the Mr. Rogers house is. So she came up with the idea as a vehicle, instead of just cutting, here you are in New York or Pittsburgh, let's cut to a exterior of a house or a cityscape. They created these miniatures and we cut to those instead. And there were a lot that were really, really beautiful, and we couldn't use them all because the movie got shorter. Of course, my first cut was a good hour or so longer than the final movie. But there was also other scenes that were hard to lose. There's a beautiful scene where Lloyd discovers that his father, that he's had a really hard time with, actually kept an album of all his articles. And, it's very moving because he realizes like his father had been kind of keeping in touch with him all these years. But it was a scene that made the relationship almost sort of peak too early because you felt like the resolution of their difficult relationship should happen later in the movie. And you didn't want to kind of tip that too soon.
So you end up, did you keep that scene and then put it later in the film, or you just...
No, unfortunately, that scene had to not be in the movie, even though the production, the props did this beautiful job, and Matthew Rhys did an incredible performance of kind of being moved by seeing this. But it was something where we needed to kind of wait. We needed to wait until they really had a reconciliation later in the movie. And then, of course, always in any movie, it's the setup of the characters and the story that, needs to be streamlined, and how much information do we need. At the same with Can You Ever Forgive Me? It's always like at any movie I work on, you need to kind of make sure you have enough information, but you also want the story to get going.
Right. And I do movie reviews, and sometimes I go, well, this movie could have been better if it had been edited a little shorter than it is. We could have cut out a few things. Because sometimes you feel like the director maybe fell in love with certain things. And you go, well, did that need to be in there? Did that really move the story forward, or did it bog it down? Or they're trying to make it an artsy film, and it's like, well, this really wasn't if you got to go one way or the other, you have to decide.
Well, that was a challenge with this movie because, partly, Mr. Rogers takes his time when he's speaking, and which is it's so beautiful, and it makes everybody slow down. But you obviously don't want the movie to be 4 hours long either. So
Yes. That would be I guess there's The Irishman's about 3.5. So maybe which I have not seen yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I know. I heard it's fantastic.
That's what I'm hearing too. Yeah, I hear it's really amazing. So if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies, and today my guest is award-nominated editor Anne McCabe, and we're talking about the brand new Tom Hanks movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Was there a part, Tom is I can only imagine what it's like to be in the editing room just watching Tom Hanks perform over and over and over again. That's got to be just a joy in itself. But was there any scene that, that you had to cut out with him that you just went oh, I'm sorry, I had to cut that one out?
No, he was really in the movie. His scenes are in the movie, for sure. Because he's incredibly fantastic in his role, and there's not a lot that we cut out of Tom Hanks. The opening of the movie is him singing the song and doing the introduction of, It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. And he worked incredibly hard to get that right, because everyone has this attachment with the people that watch the show to how that little sequence goes, the way that the real Mr. Rogers started every show. So the pressure was on for that one, but he does it beautifully. He has to time everything perfectly, sing the right line where he throws his shoe, and he hadn't been doing it for years the way that the actual real Fred Rogers had been. But he did a beautiful job.
No, yes. He's just wonderful to watch, and this film it showcases him beautifully as always. What did you do to prepare for this? And when going into the editing booth, what's your preparation, and what did you have to do, particularly for this film?
Well, this movie, like I said, it's about a show that a lot of people are already very familiar with. So definitely had to watch a lot of episodes, and just sort of wrap my head around how this was going to be a different kind of movie than the usual thing I work on. It's a tough story. It's raw. It's emotional, and it's not like quick jokes and things. So I had to kind of, in some ways, not be the person whose mind is racing all the time. We had a joke around the cutting room that everybody was nicer to their families and more patient with their children while we were working on this movie, because it was influencing us.
The perfect Christmas movie for sure.
Exactly.
Christmas
exactly.
Movie.
Patient understanding. Listening, a lot of listening,
We definitely need those messages. There's no question about it. Tell me a little bit about the music and how that played in this movie for you when you were editing.
Oh, gosh, yes, for sure. Because, the music in the actual show is, most of it's Johnny Costa, who's this incredible piano player. And the music is live on the show. Oh. They had musicians standing there playing music while they were shooting the show. So we dug up a lot of Johnny Costa, but also Nate Heller, who's the composer, who's actually Mariel Heller's brother, he also did the music on Can You Ever Forgive Me? And he was involved from the beginning. So we interwove a lot of Mr. Rogers' songs from the show and music from the show. And we tried different things in the cutting room, which I love to do. And I love to be involved with the composer so early on. And he did an incredible job. The score is absolutely beautiful. But it takes some of the themes from the actual show that he weaves in and out of his score.
Beautiful, just beautiful. What was the biggest challenge on this movie, other than trying to really stay true to who Mr. Rogers was and his character and his spirit and honoring that? What else was a challenge for you?
Well, definitely, always keeping the right pace. And it's a complicated pace for this movie because it isn't quick cuts, but, a lot of it's very subtle. It's very much subtly building performances in the story and shaping the story, keeping it, keeping everybody's attention on what's happening and keeping the tension up, but also allowing the moments of quiet. And there's the scene in the restaurant where Mr. Rogers really asks for a moment of silence. And it's very rare in a movie where you actually just stop everything and all the sound drops out. And he turns and he looks and he breaks the wall and he looks at the audience. So it's the quiet moments that you need to make sure you're keeping to the right length and not overdoing it or not underdoing it.
So again, that pacing, keeping the pacing, going at all times.
It's a different type of pacing.
Yes, very different.
I work on a show called Succession, which is the completely opposite type of pacing. So, sort of removing that mindset to go to a different type of mindset.
Now, your next project, I understand, you're going to be working with Robin Wright on her directorial debut on a new movie called Land. Have you started working on that?
Yes, I'm in the cutting room right now, and it's a stunning, beautiful movie. They shot up in Canada, and it's about a woman who takes herself off the grid, suffering from PTSD, and it has some elements of this, reflective way of thinking and trying to heal. It's also an incredibly moving movie, and she does an amazing job.
So she's directing it and starring in it?
Yes, and that's quite a challenge.
Yes, it is. It is quite a challenge. Who else is in the movie?
Demian Bashir. It's real, and it's really not a lot of characters because it's really about her being out in the wilderness and taking herself off the grid.
When is that coming out, Anne?
Well, I'm not sure yet. We're already we're sort of very early stages now. They just finished shooting.
And so you're deep. Are you knee deep in the editing process right now?
Absolutely, yes.
I think you were last year when we talked. You were knee deep in this movie.
Yes, for sure. And it's like you have to switch gears to think about the other one. But yeah.
When did you wrap on this? When did you finish editing A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood?
We finished in the summer, June, early June.
And then do you take a break in between before you jump into the next project, or is it boom, boom, boom?
Well, I went right on to Succession, which I had done the first season, the show on HBO. Mm-hmm. And so I did this, I came back and did some of the second season. And then I went on to this Land project that I'm on now.
Well, fun. We'll have to have you back on the show to talk about Land next time.
Okay, well, that would be wonderful.
Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. You have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Okay.
You were listening to the Jan Price Show all about movies. And my guest today was Anne McCabe, who is an award-nominated editor. And we're talking about the new Tom Hanks movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. If you've missed any of the Jan Price Shows all about movies, they are archived on our website, thejanpriceshow.com. They're also on the iHeart podcast channel, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Podbean, YouTube, and your smart TV. There's no reason for you to never hear the Jan Price Show all about movies. We're everywhere. Thank you for listening.
On PowerTalk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeart Radio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.